We're live.
Good morning. I'm Ryan Klumpner, Vice Chair of the San Diego Housing Commission Board of Commissioners. It is 9:03 on July 10th, 2020. I'm calling to order the special meeting of the board. The process we're using for today's meeting is authorized by Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-29-20, which he issued on March 17th to address the COVID-19 public health emergency. The meeting is occurring by video conference with all board members, our president and CEO, and the Housing Commission staff participating by video. Our general counsel is participating by telephone. For the record, I will ask each board member to indicate their presence as I say your name. Commissioner Akers.
I am here.
Commissioner Davis.
Present.
Commissioner Hester. I believe you were muted, but yeah.
Present.
Here. Commissioner Hubbard is not with us today. Commissioner Mitchell will be joining us shortly. Our chairperson, Stephanie Benvenuto, is not with us today as she continues her maternity leave. We send her our best wishes. No members of the public are in attendance. However, members of the public may watch the video conference and hear the audio of today's meeting, which is being streamed live online. The agenda for today's meeting included a link to the website for the San Diego Housing Commission Board of Commissioners, where the public can access the live streaming for today's meeting. The public has been provided with an alternative opportunity to provide comments to the board through an online comment form. A link to this form was also included on the agenda for today's meeting, which was posted on the San Diego Housing Commission's website, sdhc.org. on Wednesday, July 1st, 2020. A revised agenda was posted on the Housing Commission's website later the same day on July 1st, 2020. It added a workshop for today's meeting. The agenda and the public comment form explained that comments about items on the agenda will be read into the record if they were submitted by 4 p.m. yesterday, Thursday, July 9th. In addition, non-agenda public comments submitted by 8 o'clock this morning will be read into the record. No non-agenda public comments were submitted for today's meeting. Now I'll ask if any commissioners would like to make any comments. Seeing no comments, the next item on our agenda is the report from the President and CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have one brief report on one item for the board, and that is an action taken by City Council a week before last, reflecting an item that we did a board workshop for you all at the board meeting last month. And that is on June the 30th, San Diego City Council voted unanimously to authorize the expenditure of some $15.1 million in federal CARES Act funds to support the COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which the Housing Commission has developed, and which again, you all heard about last month. We are administering this program, the Housing Commission is, on behalf of the city. With these funds, the program will be able to help approximately 3,500 low-income families that are experiencing financial hardships because of COVID-19. This program will provide one-time assistance of up to $4,000 per household to help pay past due rent or upcoming rent payments. The online application for the program will be available no later than July 20th through our website, which is www.sdhc.org, and applications will be accepted through July 31st. Priority will be given to families with minor children and households where at least one member is age 62 or older. Applications will be sorted and assigned numbers at random for the process of identifying the applicants who will receive a rental assistance payment. It will not be first come, first served. We anticipate that payments will be made starting in August and continue through September. You will recall that this program was presented to the board as a workshop item at your June 12th meeting, and the council approval of funding was pending. This is an agency-wide effort that has built on our success with our existing rental assistance programs, and Housing Commission staff across all departments throughout the agency continue the great work to implement this program as quickly and as effectively as possible. And I especially want to acknowledge two of the Housing Commission staff departments for their good work with this program. The Rental Assistance Division and the Information Technology Department, both Asu, Zena, and Beto and their folks have done wonderful work on this. And this will be a good addition to the programs the city is implementing right now in response to COVID-19. And thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my report for this morning. Mr. Chair, are you still on mute?
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the special meeting of June 12th, 2020. Do any commissioners wish to make any changes to the minutes, or do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank
That was
you.
Commissioner Davis.
We have a motion by Commissioner Davis and a second by
I'll second that one.
Commissioner Akers. Thank you. To approve the minutes of the minutes from June 12th, the special meeting. For the record, I will ask each commissioner to say your vote on the motion when I state your name. Commissioner Akers.
Approve.
Commissioner Davis.
Approve.
Commissioner Hester.
Aye.
Thank you. We have 3 commissioners voting in favor, and I also vote in favor. No commissioners opposing. The motion carries by a vote of 4-0. Moving on, I am proposing that items 100 and 101 be placed on the consent agenda for approval this morning. Item 100 is the action to amend Appendix A of the San Diego Housing Commission Policy PO 101. And item 101 on the agenda is the application for the State of California Housing and Community Development Local Housing Trust Fund Program funding. No public comments were submitted for these items. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Ryan.
Thank you. We have a motion by Commissioner Hester and a second by Commissioner Akers to approve the consent agenda. For the record, I will ask each commissioner to say your vote on the motion when I state your name. Commissioner Akers.
I approve.
Commissioner Davis.
I approve.
Commissioner Hester.
Approve.
And then checking in to see if Commissioner Mitchell has joined us by phone. No? Okay. We have 4 votes in favor of the consent agenda and no votes opposed. I also vote in favor. We will now proceed to the presentations today. The PowerPoint presentations were emailed to commissioners yesterday, July 9th, and are posted to the Housing Commission's website. Item 101, the first item is, item 102, Hillcrest Inn property acquisition. Assembly Bill 1637 and California Health and Safety Section 34340 A3 require the Housing Commission to hold a public hearing on this item. In compliance with this requirement, notice of the time and place of this hearing was published in the San Diego Union Tribune newspaper on June 25th and July 2nd, 2020. The published notices were included, also included instructions for submitting public comments to the board on this item pursuant to the governor's executive order N2920. No public comments were submitted for item 102. Vice President of Development, Perry Zaker, will be presenting this item. Please begin when you are ready. I assume we're having a little technical issue.
Yeah,
this
certainly on my end, it's Chuck Christensen.
This is Scott.
Can
Marshall.
anybody?
I asked Perry to see if she was muted.
It looks like Perry's on mute.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let me mute my phone. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Well, good morning. Perry Zaker, Vice President of Real Estate Development. So today we're here to present you the acquisition of Hillcrest Inn. We are requesting authorization to acquire the 45-unit Hillcrest Inn property, which will provide 36 units of affordable housing to households with incomes at or below 80% of area median income, or AMI, 4 units for households with incomes at or below 120% of AMI, and 5 units for households with incomes at or below 150% AMI. Assembly Bill 1637, which was signed into law in 2017, now allows the San Diego Housing Commission to provide financing for developments that include middle income housing, such as this proposed acquisition. And this particular acquisition will actually be one of the first to use the new AB 1637 regulations, which supports the creation of rental housing units across a range of affordability levels and addresses the need by middle income households, which we often refer to as the missing middle, who are ineligible for housing assistance, but can't necessarily afford rising rents in the city of San Diego. In addition, 12 of the units here are designated for permanent supportive housing, which allows the Housing Commission to advance objectives of Housing First San Diego by providing housing for individuals experiencing homelessness.
Can we
The
pause
slide
for
two.
pause for 1 second?
Sure.
Is the so the presentation's not moving forward? The slides aren't changing? Is
That was just my first slide.
Okay.
Sorry.
just checking? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Sorry.
So slide 2. Okay. So the Hillcrest Inn property is located at 3754 Fifth Avenue in the Hillcrest neighborhood, as shown on this map here. Slide 3. The property contains 45 short-term market rate residential units right now. It also includes 1 manager's unit and the leasing office, and has on-site laundry as well. All the units are studio style. They average approximately 200 square feet. Each one has bathrooms and kitchenettes that include a refrigerator, countertop, sink, and microwave. Next slide. So acquisition of the property will preserve these SRO units and help provide housing for individuals experiencing homelessness while creating new affordable housing, all by utilizing an existing resource. The property also lies in close proximity to groceries and retail services. It has multiple mass transit points nearby and is also very close to Balboa Park and downtown San Diego. Next slide. The property will be purchased at $8 million, slightly below the appraised value of $8.1 million, which is in compliance with the Housing Commission's acquisition policy by purchasing at or below the appraised value. And the budget before you today includes the acquisition as well as costs to address ADA and 504 accessibility at the site and in the units, fire and life safety systems, and any immediate needs. A comprehensive renovation will not take place immediately after acquisition, other than the items I just described, but is contemplated for the future. Short and sweet presentation for you today, but we are here if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have any questions? If there are no questions, I will just make a comment that this seems like a great acquisition to us, both the cost per unit and the multiple objectives that we're fulfilling with this in terms of expanding our housing stock and preserving. Thank you very much. Do we have a motion?
So move, Ryan. Commissioner Hefter.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second, Commissioner Davis.
Great. We have a motion by Commissioner Hester and a second by Commissioner Davis to approve item 101. As I say your name, please state your vote on the motion. Commissioner Akers,
Approve.
Commissioner Davis.
Approve.
I think you mean 102.
Excuse me, did I say 10? Yeah. We have a motion. Let me just start all over again here.
Yeah.
We have a motion by Commissioner Hester and a second by Commissioner Davis to approve item 102. As I say your name, please state your vote on the motion. Commissioner Akers.
I approve.
Commissioner Davis.
I approve.
Commissioner Hester.
Aye.
Has Commissioner Mitchell joined us yet? Okay, and I also vote to approve. Commissioners, four commissioners, Commissioner Akers, Davis, Hester, and myself voted in favor of the motion, and no commissioners are opposed. The motion carries 4-0. Moving on to item 103. Our next item is 103, an informational workshop this morning regarding the San Diego Affordable Housing Preservation Study. No public comments were submitted for this item. Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations and Policy, Suket Dayal, Vice President of Policy, Wendy DeWitt, and Housing Preservation Coordinator, Marcus Sproul, will present this item. You may begin when you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Gentry, Mr. Christensen. My name is Suket Dayal, Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations and Policy, and I'm here with Vice President Wendy DeWitt and Preservation Coordinator Marcus Sproul. We're excited to share the Preserving Affordable Housing in the City of San Diego report and hope this provides a guiding framework for policymakers and community stakeholders to develop an effective preservation strategy. Next slide, please, Garford. Thanks. We're all familiar with the acute shortage of affordable housing in our city and its impact on lower income, working families, older adults, and people with disabilities. The solution to the affordability housing issue is treating new construction and preservation as balanced tenants. A common misconception is we can build our way out of this mess, but you can't build fast enough at the rate of the loss. A preservation strategy is required. What's also missed in the conversation is the impact on families. This is their home, their social structure that connects the kids' school, employment, community support. Any disruption can have long-term adverse effects. The Preservation Initiative is an exciting new effort that was championed by Council President Gomez. Under her leadership as the chair of the Smart Growth and Land Use Committee, the committee identified preservation as one of the priorities for the 2018 work plan. Next slide, please. So in support of the committee's work, we contracted with consultants, HRNA advisors, who partnered with the National Housing Trust and commissioned a study on preservation in San Diego. Now, HRNA's expertise was in the deep data analysis, and NHT's experience identified the national best practices. There are 4 components to the study. First, it provides an analysis of the existing affordable housing inventory within our city. Second, it assesses the need. Now, this is done by examining the trends. We look back 20 years and look forward 20 years, how the housing stock has changed over the years and what to expect in the future. Third, we're going to take a look at the cost analysis. And lastly, best practices from around the country to address affordable housing challenges and guide us in developing a framework. Next slide, please. So let's start with the definition of preservation. Preservation is defined as any action that extends the deed restricted status of an affordable rental housing unit or converts a naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAH, to a deed restricted unit. The goal is to ensure affordability remains in place and continues without disruption to our families. NOAHs, or naturally occurring affordable housing, are residential units. These are affordable, but are unsubsidized by any federal program. So basically, they have no affordability restrictions. Marcus will start us off with San Diego's affordable housing landscape and discuss trends in the market. He'll then share the financial modeling. And then Wendy will provide the framework based on the national best practices. An effective strategy has to tackle the financial, regulatory, and technical aspects of preservation. And with that, Marcus.
Great, thank you, Saket.
Next slide, please.
The first thing the study does is establish the multi-family rental housing inventory that is affordable in the city of San Diego. And to do that, we needed to build a database of the two components of affordable housing, which are one, deed restricted affordable housing. That's housing that typically has government financing that requires the owner to restrict rents that are affordable for a specific number of years. And two, naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAH, and that's unrestricted market rate housing that, due to a variety of factors, is rented by the owner at a price that is affordable to a household earning 60% of area median income or lower. Once that database was complete with these two different components, we were able to map that database to provide a geospatial understanding of the affordable multifamily rental housing inventory. Next slide, please. To help you visualize this, here's a chart describing the total housing inventory in the city and how the study broke down the various components to arrive at the multifamily rental housing inventory that is affordable. We see the total number of units in the city is about 555,000, with half being renter occupied. And we defined multifamily rental as rental properties with 5 or more units. And the study focused on the almost 164,000 units meeting that definition. Next slide, please. Of those 164,000 multifamily rental units, about 14%, over 23,000, are deed restricted affordable. Again, meaning they have government financing that restricts rents. But the vast majority of those are unrestricted, about 86%. And rents for those unrestricted units are set by individual property owners based on housing market conditions, neighborhood demand, unit quality, and other differentiating characteristics. About a third of those unrestricted units, 47,000, can be considered naturally occurring affordable housing. Again, meaning they're currently renting in the marketplace at or below a level that is affordable to a household earning 60% of area median income or lower. Our study found that NOAH units are typically in older buildings that are smaller and located predominantly in lower income neighborhoods. Combined then, the city currently has just over 70,000 affordable multifamily rental units, a combination of deed restricted affordable housing and unrestricted naturally occurring affordable housing. Next slide, please. Here's some maps, and the first one that we're going to see here is a map of parcels with deed restricted units in the city. And we can see that most of these are near the El Cajon Boulevard corridor, from University Heights and North Park through City Heights and over to SDSU. There are also a significant number of units that are deed restricted downtown, just east and south of downtown and in the San Ysidro area. Next slide, please. In terms of the naturally occurring affordable housing, this map shows that the majority of NOAH properties are found along the El Cajon Boulevard corridor, along the coast from Ocean Beach to Pacific Beach, southeast of downtown, and in San Ysidro. Again, these are market rate units that are renting at 60% of AMI or lower. Next slide, please. Next, we analyzed trends. We looked back 20 years to the year 2000 and also projected forward 20 years to 2040. We used census data to understand historic housing need and availability, the San Diego Housing Commission database to understand deed restricted production and expiration, and market and census data to find the current rent amounts at unrestricted properties to determine the NOAH parcels. All of these data sources allow us to create a projection forward to 2040 based on past trends. Next slide, please. Here's a chart representing the current state of the inventory with regard to household need for affordable housing at various income levels and the availability of units for rent at those same levels. The blue bars represent household need, and the gray bars on the right show affordable unit availability. The red shows the availability gap, while green is the unit availability surplus. Focusing on the second set of bars from the left, 50% of area median income, we see there's a need for 108,000 units for families earning 50% of AMI or lower, but only about 61,000 units available. That creates an availability gap of 47,000 units. The chart is cumulative, meaning each income level includes all of the lower income levels to the left. As we can see at the higher income levels, households have many units that are affordable to them, but at the lower income levels, particularly below 50% of AMI, there is an acute shortage of affordable housing. And many of these households are cost burdened and paying a high portion of their income on rent. Next slide, please. This chart shows the trends specifically within the unrestricted housing inventory over time. Looking back 20 years to the year 2000, we can see that the majority of unrestricted multifamily rental housing of 5 or more units were renting at a level affordable to households earning 50% of area median income or lower, represented by the blue bars on the bottom. But this has changed significantly since then and is projected to reverse to a majority renting above 80% of area median income by 2040. For example, in 2000, there were 92,000 unrestricted units renting at 50% of AMI or lower. Currently in 2020, there are 26,000 unrestricted units with rents affordable at that same level. And by 2040, it's projected that only 9,000 unrestricted units will remain that are affordable at 50% of AMI. Conversely, in 2000, there were 9,000 units renting above 80% of AMI in 2000, represented by the gray bars on the top. But by 2040, there are projected to be 122,000 units at these higher rents. Since 2000, the San Diego Housing Commission has partnered with developers to build 14,500 new deed-restricted affordable units and preserved 4,200 deed-restricted units, while affordability restrictions expired on approximately 2,600 deed-restricted units. While this is significant, the net increase in deed-restricted affordable housing in the last 20 years is insufficient to make up for the more than 66,000 unrestricted naturally occurring affordable housing units that lost affordability due to changing market conditions in the same time period. Next slide, please. The study also evaluated the cost to preserve affordable units. In terms of deed-restricted units, there's long been a good understanding of those costs, and the city has been reporting them as required by the housing element. There was less clarity on the cost to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. And just to clarify again, that means properties that are on the open market, but they're being rented by the owner at a level affordable to households earning 60% of AMI or lower. In order to gain a better understanding then, the study performed financial modeling of the 3 most common types of NOAA in the city, representing just under 1/3 of the projected loss of the current NOAA inventory. This chart shows the 3 most common typologies identified, the projected loss of affordability for each, and their various costs to preserve. I will focus briefly on the second type, mid-sized properties of 10 to 50 units built in the 1970s and 80s. As we can see here, there are approximately 13,500 units of these type of NOAA properties, and the estimated loss in the next 20 years is $5,250. The cost to preserve them is $471,000 per unit, and the total cost to preserve would be approximately $3.5 billion in the next 20 years. The study indicates that NOAA preservation projects have a large amount of inherent risk and variability from project to project, and estimates the average current cost $471,000 per unit, and the local gap financing that will be required would be $880 million over the next 20 years, and that would be from state and local sources. And that's just for the one typology. In total, 9,200 units of the most common types of NOAA are expected to lose affordability by 2040. Next slide, please. Preserving all of the 13,450 units that are at risk of losing affordability in the next 20 years, and that's both the 4,200 deed-restricted units and the 9,250 unrestricted naturally occurring affordable housing units, would require an average of $86 million in new gap funding from state and local sources per year for the next 20 years. We estimate that gap financing could be leveraged with federal tax credits, bonds, and program funds to pay for a total preservation cost of approximately $400 million annually to preserve an average of 672 units each year for 20 years. Again, these estimates have factored in both acquisition and construction cost increases for the next 20 years based on long-term trends. I will now turn it over to Wendy DeWitt, who will go over the recommendations for a preservation strategy framework for the city. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Marcus. The next phase of this study informs the development of a strategy to address housing preservation challenges in San Diego. The preservation strategy framework takes the local knowledge gained from studying the housing stock, interviews with 30 stakeholders, and a survey of best practices from California and around the country. The following 10 recommendations are divided into 4 categories: capital resources, preservation policies, tenant protections, and capacity building. The next few slides will give you an overview of each of the recommendations, as well as some insight as to why they are recommended. Next slide, please. The first category, capital resources, contains recommendations for resources explicitly dedicated to preservation. These recommendations identify potential immediate sources of capital. The first recommendation is to provide seed funding to create a public-private affordable housing preservation fund that is a dedicated source of funding for preservation activities. By creating a preservation fund, the city can provide short-term acquisition, pre-development, and gap financing to preserve existing housing stock. A fund can leverage private investment and serve as a source of dedicated funding, while the owner seeks permanent financing for long-term preservation. Recommendation 2 is to redirect funds originally associated with the city's redevelopment agency dissolution for funding preservation. The best practices survey looked at the cities of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oakland, Alameda, and Fremont, and found that these municipalities have dedicated anywhere from 20% to 100% of their former redevelopment funds and dedicated those funds to preservation. Recommendation 3 in this category is to implement a short-term residential occupancy fee with revenue dedicated to preservation. Nationwide, examples range from a 3% community impact fee that was instituted in Massachusetts to a combination of taxes and fees in Chicago, including a fee to set up a short-term rental platform. Next slide, please. The second category of recommendations are preservation policies. No two communities are the same and therefore necessitate unique approaches to preservation. Recommendations in this category identify proven policies adopted by other cities with similar preservation challenges to those of San Diego. These recommendations are meant to provide ideas rather than tools to be replicated in every detail. The first of these is to adopt a preservation ordinance to strengthen and expand the rights granted by California's state preservation notice law. The major difference between California's law and the other best practices surveyed is the triggering event for notice. California could strengthen, well, San Diego could strengthen the state California noticing law here locally by adopting a preservation ordinance that requires deed restricted properties to notify the city of an intended sale. Presently, the California law requires notice of an intent to opt out of affordable housing restrictions or when those restrictions are expiring, but there isn't necessarily an intent to sell. Providing a notice of intent to sell could also include a right of first refusal for nonprofit buyers to actually purchase the deed restricted properties. Recommendation 5 is to offer incentives to owners of unrestricted properties in exchange for affordability restrictions. There were several examples of this in the best practices study. Washington, DC provides grants to property owners for limited repairs for health and safety. small amounts not to exceed 25,000 per unit. And at least half of the units must be restricted to 80% of AMI or less for a term of 5 years. This kind of program helps the necessary, or it provides the necessary financial resources to owners to help ensure livable housing conditions while maintaining affordability. Recommendation 6 is to strengthen San Diego's existing single room occupancy ordinance to maintain affordability. This recommendation mirrors the preservation ordinance recommendation in that it would provide a notice of intent to sell the SRO. It's important to recognize that the sale of an SRO is a valuable opportunity for preservation. San Diego could pass an ordinance that provides preservation buyers with a right of first offer at the point of intended sale, and consider granting a right of first refusal to appropriate nonprofits. Next slide, please. The next category, tenant protections, deals with situations where preservation is not possible. In this instance, it is imperative that appropriate laws are implemented to mitigate the impacts of displacement and homelessness. Recommendation 7 is to require relocation assistance for displaced residents. And this includes all residents, not only residents of publicly assisted housing, where typically relocation assistance is already required, but all housing where residents are displaced. Some jurisdictions in the best practices survey have placed conditions on the requirement, such as displacement that's caused by no cause evictions, or a rent increase of 10% or more over a year, or a substantial change in lease terms. Other jurisdictions have limited it to households that have incomes of 50% of area median income or less. The final category is capacity building. Communities with successful preservation initiatives have made preservation an explicit priority. These recommendations outline tangible steps the city can take to increase capacity and create an institutionalized commitment to preservation. Recommendation 8 is to develop and staff the administration of a preservation program. Recommendation 9, create an interagency preservation working group. And recommendation 10, create a preservation collaborative composed of non-governmental preservation stakeholders. Los Angeles, Colorado, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. all provide varied examples of working groups and successful collaboration that San Diego can draw from. The Housing Commission has hired a preservation coordinator and commissioned this study to assist with the development of a proactive preservation program. And the final slide, please. In conclusion, the recommendations in this study, Preserving Affordable Housing in the City of San Diego, provide a guiding framework for policy as well as resource development strategies, which will enable San Diego to preserve both deed restricted and naturally occurring affordable housing over the next 20 years. Preserving the existing inventory wherever possible is an essential part of a comprehensive approach to addressing the housing affordability and homelessness crises, and will help retain affordable housing options for all residents in the city of San Diego. And this concludes staff's presentation, and we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you all. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on this item? Commissioner Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. I apologize for my delay in entering the meeting. I was stuck in another meeting with a council member, but I was really excited to be able to join this segment. One of the things that I noted when I read this portion of the packet was the recommendations on the preservation aspect, and I think this is an important moment for us as a Housing Commission, because I remember being at the chamber back in 2000, 2001, when the housing crisis was starting to take a toll, and we were seeing we were seeing high rises being built downtown to the detriment of the single room occupancy market. And we were seeing people who'd done nothing wrong be displaced because there was a desire to I don't like to use the word gentrify, the desire to have more gentrification downtown, but there was a desire to change the face of downtown. I often worry that all the work that the good work that Rick Gentry and Chuck are doing with us on with my fellow commissioners on finding locations for people that are permanent housing and permanent supportive housing and all the conversations we're having about this space, that we're going to do some good work. But if there's a chance that this good work somehow ends at some point 30 years down the line, what have we done? And we've all talked about that you cannot continue to have a city or a region where housing is such a reward of this nature, because it's just unaffordable. And so on the SRO suggestion, I guess I have a question about to the staff is that something we would have to do at City Hall, where they would have to go and change? Because originally there used to be an SRO ordinance that said for every unit you got rid of, you had to replace it with 2. And then the city council back then decided, well, we'll get rid of that. And that's why you have the SRO problem you have today. So that doesn't require a public vote. It just requires action at City Hall to make sure that as we rebuild the SRO market, that it is protected forever. That's my first question. And the second question on the packet is, there's on the preservation and offering incentives, and this is for Mr. Gentry, as we're looking at some of the things that we're discussing about purchasing and using for stock. As public opposition builds, people will start to look at the timelines of how something is tied to an area, and it's 30 years, 40 or 50 years. When you talk the incentives for preservation, can you describe a little bit more about what those incentives look like and how hard they are to offer?
Yes, sir. Let me, if I could, prior to that, give a little context for this report. I'd like the board members to understand why we did this and how it fits in with all the other things going on right now. And Council President Gomez, about a year ago, asked the Housing Commission to hire a preservation coordinator. Hence, Marcus is on board. We're glad he is. He's done wonderful work with us the last year. And to do a study to define the nature of the problem in real specific terms. And there's one element of this report that I think I'd like to point out to you is very significant, that has no replication we can find anywhere in the country. And that is including the NOAA units, the naturally occurring affordable housing units, in the analysis and statement of the issue. There are other cities that have defined preserving deed restricted housing, whether that be old-fashioned public housing, Section 8, tax credit housing, what have you. But the naturally occurring stuff, which we've included, is fairly rare. And I think that gives us a way to measure going forward. So I wanted you all to have that understanding, that context. The issue now is to answer what I call the so what question. So we've identified the problem. Now, so what do we do about it? A lot of this is going to require some resources and some dovetailing, some relationship establishing with other programs. I think that this report dovetails in nicely with a production goals report that the Housing Commission did in September of 17. We hired the McKinsey people to do it at Council Member Scott Sherman's request. And at the time, Scott chaired the Land Use and Housing Committee. And so that posited what we need to do in terms of production and growth to deal with growth. And I think this is a natural corollary in how do we preserve what we got already. When we produced this report, we presented the same report to the City Council on June the 30th. And Council President Gomez then assigned the particulars of this to Land Use and Housing, including, Mitch, an SRO statement or policy that we've just drafted that will go to, which we can talk with you all about in great detail next meeting of this if you'd like to. But all of this is going to LUNH, and then their first meeting on this, you got to think it the week after next,
They moved it to July the 30th.
July the 30th. This is in 3 weeks then. And so what this is going to require is the establishment of policy on preservation. And as Wendy laid out on those 3 criteria areas, it's going to be what do we do, how do we pay for it, how we can preserve, what we do to help people where the preservation is not going to occur. And some of it's just going to boil down to resources available to us, balancing with all the other needs that are out there. So that may not be a specific answer to your question, Mitch, but it's kind of putting it in context with the other things. Mitch, you need to unmute.
I appreciate that additional clarification, because that was my big thing. I do think that the preservation component and the SRO policy are 2 of the most important things that we're going to, as a body, are going to have to do. As Chairman Klumpner and I have spent a lot of time together recently, I think that to work this hard to try and correct a problem that is just a huge burden for our region, we need to make sure that it has staying power. So the work that you and the team do, Mr. Gentry, are going to be really important. And obviously, I think there'll be a lot of people that jump behind us and trying to help us with what you roll out that needs to happen. So I look forward to hearing more.
And I suspect that there won't be one solution, but there will be a matrix of solutions to apply insofar as we can. I think a lot of it still has to do with the need for greater production as well. And if you add new production in with preservation, with a 2-fisted approach, if you will, I think you've got some hope here. And on the preservation side, there are any number of creative solutions we've had in the past on keeping properties over time, and it could be that a lump sum payment to an owner to keep a property affordable for maybe 10 years instead of something that's a full rehab for 30 years might be an option. We've employed that just lately on a couple of properties in town.
Okay.
It could be that from a demand side, the ability to help the residents pay the rent to stay there could be a solution too. So I think it's going to take a creative matrix of options to respond to this.
That's fair. I appreciate it. I'll just close with this. I think that the as you said, the matrix is going to be important. And I want to correct what I believe was really a problematic period for the city of San Diego, where we chose to oversee the building of $600,000 condominiums and up, and while displacing people who are making $25,000 to $40,000 a year at a regular clip. And we are now paying for that, and we have to fix that.
Great. Commissioner Hester.
I wanted to clarify if we often talk about the population that's a population of our clients, or this is for every people in San Diego. So I wanted to clarify that when we're drafting this plan, this is essentially for everyone, if that makes sense.
Understood. And that's our intent, is that there's a whole gradation of incomes in the city and abilities from a demand standpoint to pay a market cost. And the issue is going to be how we deal with those different gradations in income. And it may be that there's one thing to do for families from, say, 50 to 80% of median, and another thing to do for families below 30. And that's pretty obvious. And I will draw your attention to what I think is a good creative first step in the action you took this morning to approve the Hillcrest Apartments. That's a small property and a drop in the ocean, if you will. But I think it's a good indication of the kind of mixed income approach we can take, where we think a property can create enough market demands to make that mixed income approach work. And that's reflected in the Todd Gloria Bill 1637 from 2.5 years ago. That's giving us the ability to go above our normal, ordinary, historical limit of 80% of median on who we serve. So I think that there are a number of items in our toolbox here that we use to address this issue. And it's a matter of us being creative enough to fix the ones that we need in the particular set of issues. And this one also, from a professional standpoint, it's going to one that I know my staff are relishing to deal with, not because there's a problem there, but because this is going to require some non-traditional solutions. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution per property, much less for the city. So it's going to require a lot of creativity on the staff's part. And that's one of the things that makes folks in this business want to get up and now in this day and age, go to 20 paces to work in.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Akers.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful presentation and making it all happen. I'm continually impressed with the great work from the commission staff in challenging times. I'm wondering if the methodology that we use for NOAA is an industry standard or unique to San Diego. The two thoughts I'm having is, even if you look at relatively close proximity, I imagine what is affordable for the folks in San Diego is a lot different than the folks in Bakersfield, California, right? And nothing against Bakersfield. I also grew up in the 661, so nothing against them, but it was just definitely different folks living there and a different housing market. And then also, if we ever have seen or plan on seeing any NOAA return, I think that we're probably going to see a housing market dip with all things related to COVID and just the natural cycles and influx of the swings in housing. And is that something either historically that we have seen in the return of the rates of NOAA coming back after they go away, or if that's built into the model? If you guys, anyone can talk about kind of how those NOAA calculations are made or predicted.
And Deon, I'll deal with the latter in a minute, but let me ask staff. I don't know which of you all want to jump in here, talking about the criteria for developing NOAA. And I don't know whether Marcus, that's you, or Sukad, you or Wendy, but one of you guys, go ahead.
Let me get it started. So to use your example, as far as the different areas have different, one of the things that was taken into consideration in the NOAAs is the area median income. And we use 60% AMI for the NOAAs. I'll let Marcus get into more of the gory details, but that's one of the key differentials as far as how it would compare to city. Marcus, you want to talk more about CoStar and how we came about that?
Sure, yeah, I could do that. So when we start with the median income, 60% of AMI, that basically then you find a rent, like say for 2-bedroom. And once you find that rent, then you need to go out and find which apartments are renting at that price. And primarily we get market data from CoStar. They're a private company, they have a private database, and they provide about 80% of the properties that we were looking at. Again, we're looking at multifamily rental of 5 or more units. So we got about 80% of the properties were available with rents. And then on top of that, then we build a statistical model, a regression model, like an algorithm. And then we were able to use census data and build the algorithm, and then we test it against the market data to see if it's working. And we get about an 80% accuracy rate on the remaining 20% that we were missing. So overall, it's about 96% accurate in terms of the NOAA.
Thank you. I'll trust you on that.
And Deon, in terms of growth and economic tough times, housing sometimes is counter-cyclical to the general economy in terms of its effect on poor people. I arrived in town here in September of 2008, just after the weekend the Lehman Brothers fell and the market crashed. And the big issue then was not affordability, it was foreclosures and what to do about it. And there was a surplus of housing for economic strata at that point, and we actually did our best to recycle some stuff. The Housing Commission here gleaned some value from the equity sitting in existing properties to create a $95 million set of loans from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in late 2009 and 2010 to increase our housing stock by 810 units in 2010 and 2012. We did that because we hit the market bottom dead center. And if we have a decrease in values in the marketplace coming up, that could help poor people in terms of what the rent structures are and affordability for purchasing. You could argue, and I heard a Fannie Mae economist say this was going to happen way back in 2008, that the lack of production of housing with ordinary to good growth economically will create housing pressures, which increases cost. And you saw that happen here as the economy grew and housing production stayed dormant by about 2015, 16. And it's been pretty dire since then. So I guess what I'm saying is a long-winded answer to your question, but if the economy dampens and housing prices dampen, then we could have some opportunities from a supply standpoint to acquire some more units, but from a demand side standpoint to help more families become more affordable. But long term, the growth will return as we want it to. We don't want to become a Detroit or a Buffalo. And if that happens, we need to make sure we've got some of these issues that are going to be stressful long term out dealt with as we go. And that's going to be, I think, the chore for us over the next 12 months or so, is we try to figure out programs to attach to the policy on SROs and other forms of NOAA to try to maintain as much as we can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a couple comments. I appreciate all the work that went into this. These are some great recommendations. My only comment would be that I think, in particular, when we're talking about the regulatory options there, the increasing renter protections, all that, I think it's really important that the other recommendations go along with those, the capital recommendations, the flexibility on the different ways that we can do preservation, because part of my concern on this is that it's easy for us to just make it impossible for these structures to turn over in any way. That doesn't mean that they are safe or healthy places to live. And so, I think with a lot of the NOAA, especially in the SRO realm, there's real health and safety concerns around that. And so, if the only option, if the only option is on that side of the spectrum, and we don't have capital options and ways to maintain the quality of the housing in those settings, then we're really setting ourselves up. I don't think that the solution to this can be to simply turn a blind eye to health and safety concerns, and not that that is being suggested here. I'm just pointing out that amongst the menu of policy recommendations, if we were to take half of those and not the other half, we would be creating a whole other set of problems for ourselves. And unfortunately, we've seen that in a lot of other cities. I mean, we've seen the fire in Oakland that I can't remember how many people died in that tragedy, but I mean, there are bad outcomes possible here that we can achieve while trying to fix a very real problem that we do need to fix. So I think I just want to point out that I think those things need to go hand in hand. I'd also point out that it's not in the scope of this study, the new inventory. This is about preservation. I understand that, but there's been a lot of good pieces written in the last year or so about sort of how we got into this situation with what happened with the type of inventory we were producing over the last 20-30 years, and how we stopped producing inventory that otherwise would have aged into being additional NOAA, and that's why our supply of NOAA has been choked off. And we're headed in the right direction. And I was really terrified by slide 12 that showed how even amongst NOAA, how there's going to be a shift towards the higher AMI at a very rapid rate, and we're already in the middle of that. I am really hoping that some of these regulatory changes that have been made with ADU restrictions, with dropping parking requirements, sort of backpedaling a lot of the things that made it impossible to produce naturally occurring affordable housing for the last 30 years, that as we sort of roll back some of those things, that we start to produce more inventory on that side of the spectrum, along with what we're doing on the new construction of the restricted affordable housing. So just to echo kind of what everyone has been saying here, I think that we need all of these things. It's hard for me to imagine us preserving our way out of this problem. It's also hard for me to imagine us simply building our way out of this problem. So, I think we need all of these. And again, I just want to say thank you to everyone that put this together, and that big menu of policy recommendations is really helpful for all of us.
Thank you, and staff have done a wonderful job. Suket, Wendy, Marcus, and Marcus was a great new hire a year ago. They've done a wonderful job. Let me point out something else to you all that I'm extremely pleased about. This is kind of a backhanded pleasure, but I'm pleased with it. The Housing Commission over the past few years has kind of morphed into providing housing policy recommendations to the city. That's not always been the case. It's grown up just over the last probably 6-8 years. And if you look at what our recommendations were based on what Councilmember Sherman requested 3 years ago in production, you look at this one, you look at the SROs, we're being asked more and more to come up with policy items that have, in some cases, gone well beyond our historic role for the city. And that gives me great pleasure. And I think that's going to continue, particularly with the huge change coming in City Hall in December of this year. So I think I want the board members to understand that not only are we implementing solutions, not only are we implementing federal programs, which continue to be the backbone of the mainstay of what we do, but we're more and more being asked by City Hall to come up with policy items on what to do. And in addition to that, figure out ways to do it. I see Lisa on the screen right now. You look at our going from doing nothing in the homelessness arena 10 years ago to where we are now. That's a huge change. And I can see that us being involved in developing policies, going all the way from theoretical to actual implementation, is going to give this organization great visibility going forward and providing, I think, another good, useful function for the city. And that pleases me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. No action is required on this item. This concludes the open session of this morning's meeting. Mr. Christensen, will you please announce the closed session agenda for this morning?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. The San Diego Housing Commission will now meet in closed session to discuss its closed session agenda. In this instance, the Commission will be talking with reference to 3 pieces of real estate that are listed as properties 1, 2, and 3 on the agenda. The real estate negotiators will be asking for direction from the board concerning price and terms of payment under the provisions of the Brown Act. I'll note for the record that there was no public request to give comments before we go into closed session. And with that, the commission will now adjourn in open session and convene in closed session. And I might just indicate that until we get the okay from Mr. Velasco that in fact we're in closed session, we should not
We're in open session.
All right. The Housing Commission Board met in closed session to discuss its closed session agenda. And by a vote of 4-0 with Vice Chair Klumpner, Commissioner Akers, Commissioner Davis, and Commissioner Mitchell voting yes, they gave direction to real estate negotiators concerning the acquisition of the 3 properties listed on the closed session agenda. That concludes the matters that were discussed in closed session.
Thank you. Chuck, did you need me to announce a time that the closed session concluded and reconvene in open session? Or is that optional?
You don't need to, but it doesn't hurt.
Okay, well, closed session concluded at 10:37 a.m. and we reconvened open session. This concludes the board's special meeting today. The meeting is adjourned at 10:39 a.m. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.